Wyoming Territory, 1887. A cold wind off the Laramie Range carries red dust across an auction yard where men buy mules, horses, cattle. And on one September morning, a girl, she stands alone in the dirt, hands bound with calf rope, a crimson dress the color of dried blood, honey hair across a face that refuses to lower. She has not heard a sound in 5 years. She has not used her voice in over one. The auctioneer shouts a price. $50, same as a mule. The crowd laughs. She does not flinch. Across the yard, a tall man in a weathered hat stops walking. He came here for a horse. He had not planned on noticing her, but she is looking up, not pleading, not begging, just looking, and something inside him, something buried in the snow 5 winters ago, cracks open like an egg. He starts walking toward her. The morning of September 14th, 1887, broke over Dry Hollow, Wyoming Territory, like a slap. Red dust, cold wind off the Laramie Range, a sky so washed out it looked like watered milk. The livestock auction had drawn ranchers from 100 miles in every direction. Cattle bawled, mules brayed, men spat tobacco and counted bills with thick weathered fingers. Travis Boone stood on a wooden crate at the far end of the yard. His voice cracked across the pens like a whip. $50, same price as a mule. The crowd laughed. Eliza Whitmore did not lift her head. She stood in the dirt, hands bound with a length of rough hemp rope, the kind they used on calves. Her travel dress had once been a deep crimson. Now it was the color of dried blood and Wyoming clay. Her boots were thin city boots never meant for this country. Her honey blonde hair had come loose from its pins. It fell around her face in a way that hid her mouth, but not her eyes. Her eyes burned, not with tears, with something fiercer, something that refused to break even when the world had tried again and again to break it. She was 19 years old. She had been on a train for 11 days. She had not heard a single sound in 5 years. Tobias Hawthorne saw her from 40 paces away. He had come to Dry Hollow for one reason. A mare. His old roan Pearl had foundered in July. Winter was 4 weeks out. He needed a strong mount for the autumn drive, and he had ridden 3 days from Crescent Ridge with $65 in his vest pocket and a list of names from Doc Whitaker. Tobias was 36, 6'4", shoulders that had broken horses and split cordwood and lifted dead men off battlefields. His hat was weathered. His jaw was set. He had not shaved in 4 days because the cold was coming, and a beard kept a man warmer than vanity. He had not planned on noticing the girl, except he did, because she was looking up, not pleading, not begging, just looking. Their eyes met across the auction yard, and something inside Tobias Hawthorne, something he thought he had buried in the snow at Fort Laramie in 1882, cracked open like an egg. $50, Boone shouted again. She cooks, she cleans, she works harder than most hired hands. Only trouble is, she cannot hear a word you say, and she does not speak none either. A rancher near the front laughed. Perfect wife for a quiet man. The crowd roared. Eliza did not flinch, but Tobias noticed her fingers. They were moving inside the rope. Small, controlled, opening and closing in a steady rhythm, the way a man flexes his hand to keep blood moving in the cold. She was not broken. She was waiting. The rancher next to Tobias spat. Hawthorne, you here for stock? I am. That one yours?" The rancher nodded at the girl. "No. Pity. Wouldn't mind her cooking my breakfast." Tobias did not answer. He was already moving. His boots crossed the yard in 12 long strides. The crowd parted because Tobias Hawthorne had the kind of shoulders crowds parted for. Boone saw him coming and grinned wide enough to show 3 missing teeth. "Well now, Mr. Hawthorne, you looking at the lady?" "I am looking at the price. $50, bargain of the season." "Where did she come from?" Boone's grin tightened. "Boston. Her stepfather brought her to Cheyenne. Said she was a burden. Sold her to me, legal and proper. I got paper on it." "Show me." Boone hesitated. "Show me the paper." Boone fumbled in his coat, pulled out a folded letter. The handwriting was sharp and educated. The signature read, "Edmund Pierce." The date was August 29th, 1887. The address was a residence on Beacon Hill, Boston, Massachusetts. Tobias read it twice. Then he looked at Eliza. She was watching his mouth, reading his lips. "Can you understand me, miss?" She nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Do you want to come with me?" Her eyes searched his face for 1 long heartbeat. 2, 3. She nodded again. $50, Tobias said. He counted out the bills. Every dollar he had brought for a horse. He laid them on Boone's outstretched palm and watched Boone's grin widen. "Pleasure doing business, Hawthorne." "It is not pleasure," Tobias said quietly. "It is mercy. Remember the difference." He cut the rope from her wrists with the bowie knife at his belt. The hemp fell into the dust. Red marks circled her skin like angry bracelets. She rubbed them once. She did not cry. "My wagon is this way." She followed him without looking back. The crowd watched them go. A few men muttered. Most did not. One woman crossed herself. A boy of maybe 10 stared with his mouth open until his mother dragged him away by the ear. Tobias did not look back either, but his hands were shaking, and he did not know why. The wagon was a buckboard. 2 geldings stood in the shade of a twisted cottonwood. The black one, Ranger, snorted when they approached. The bay Dakota dipped his head and sniffed at Eliza's outstretched hand. She let him. She did not flinch. She placed her palm flat against the bay's neck and closed her eyes for 1 breath. Then she opened them and looked at Tobias. Something in her face had changed. It was not gratitude. It was something quieter, something older, the look of a person who has just decided, after a long time of not deciding anything, that she is going to live. "Can you climb up?" Tobias asked. Yes. She nodded. She placed her thin city boot on the wheel hub and pulled herself into the wagon bed with the easy grace of someone used to hard work. She tucked her crimson skirt around her knees and folded her hands. Tobias climbed onto the bench. He gathered the reins. He looked back at her. She was watching him. 3 days to Crescent Ridge, he said, mouthing the words slowly. "My ranch, 2 brothers, quiet country. You will be safe." She tilted her head. Then she reached into the small carpet bag at her feet, pulled out a flat piece of pine no bigger than a man's hand, a stub of chalk. She wrote in careful schooled handwriting and held it up. "I cannot hear. I cannot speak well. Do you want your money back?" Tobias read it. He looked at her face. He took the slate gently from her hand. He turned it over. He wrote on the other side with his own thick fingers. "You are not goods. You are not a mule. 3 days. You decide." He gave it back. She read it. She read it again. Then she pressed the slate against her chest. For a moment, a small private gesture like she was pressing the words into her own heart. Tobias snapped the reins. The wagon rolled out of Dry Hollow under a washed milk sky, and neither of them said another word for 6 hours. They made camp the first night in a shallow draw south of the Medicine Bow foothills. Tobias built a small fire. He boiled coffee. He shared hardtack and dried elk from his saddlebag. Eliza ate slowly. She watched his hands. Big hands. Scarred knuckles. A faint white line across the back of his left wrist where something sharp had once gone in deep. She wrote on her slate. "You were a soldier," Tobias read it. He looked at the fire for a long moment. "Cavalry. A long time ago." She wrote again. Wiped. Wrote. "Why did you stop?" Tobias did not answer at first. He turned the coffee pot. He poured a second cup. He handed it to her with both hands. "Because I would not shoot women and children." She held the cup. She did not write anything, but she nodded slowly, and in that nod was a whole understanding, the kind of understanding that does not need words because both people have already lived the thing the words would describe. Tobias slept on his bedroll near the wagon wheel. He gave her his coat and the wagon bed. He kept his rifle across his knees. He did not sleep much, because he kept hearing the auction in his head, $50, same price as a mule. And he could not get the sound of the crowd laughing out of his ears. The second day dawned colder. By noon, the wind had teeth. By 2 o'clock, the sky to the west had turned the color of bruised peaches. Tobias squinted at it. He knew that sky. Every man who had ridden the high plains long enough knew that sky. Sandstorm. A big one. He snapped the reins harder. Ranger and Dakota stretched into a trot. The wagon rattled and bounced over the broken trail. There were rocky hills ahead. Maybe an hour, maybe more. He did not have an hour. The wind died. Everything went still. That was the worst sign of all. Then a hand grabbed his sleeve. He turned. Eliza had climbed onto the bench beside him. Her hair whipped loose around her face. She was pointing south, not the hills, south, toward open country. "There is nothing south," Tobias said. She kept pointing. She pressed her palm flat against her chest. Then she pressed it flat against his arm. Then she pointed south again. "Trust me." The wind began to howl. Red dust lifted from the prairie in spinning columns. Dakota tossed his head and tried to bolt. Ranger pinned his ears back. Tobias had 10 seconds to decide. He looked at the girl. He looked at the sky. He looked at the girl again. "God help me," he muttered. He turned the wagon south, straight into open country. The wall of dust came over them like the end of the world. The horses tried to bolt. Tobias hauled on the reins with both arms. The wagon jolted sideways. Eliza grabbed the bench. She did not scream because she could not, but her eyes were fixed on a point in the distance that Tobias could not see. She pointed harder. Then the ground dropped away. The wagon plunged down a steep slope into a narrow draw. The walls rose up around them, 20 feet of red sandstone on either side. The wind broke against the rim and roared overhead like a freight train. Down here, it was almost quiet. Tobias pulled the team to a stop beneath a rocky overhang. For a long moment he just sat there, breathing hard, heart hammering. Ranger and Dakota trembled in the traces, but were not bolting anymore. He looked at Eliza. She was already moving. She climbed down. She began untying the supplies. She cured the grain sacks. She gathered the loose tarp and weighted it with stones. She moved like she had done this work her whole life, which she had not. Tobias stared. Then he climbed down and joined her. They worked side by side as the storm screamed overhead. He unhitched the horses. She tied them under the overhang. He pulled the tarp tight. She knotted the corners. When it was done, they stood together against the sandstone wall and watched red dust pour over the rim of the draw like a waterfall. It went on for an hour, maybe two. Eliza did not flinch the whole time. When the wind finally broke, the silence was so deep, it felt like a held breath. Tobias took off his hat. He brushed the dust from the brim. He looked at her. "I have ridden this trail," he said slowly so she could read his lips, 100 times. "I have never seen this draw." She wrote on her slate, held it up. I felt it through the ground. Tobias read the words twice. "You felt it." She nodded. She pressed her palm flat against the sandstone. She closed her eyes. She opened them. She wrote again. "The earth has shapes. Hollow ones sing different. My mother taught me." Tobias stood very still. Out here, the mountain decides who survives. That was what his grandfather used to say. He had never believed it before. He believed it now. They reached Crescent Ridge on the afternoon of the third day. The valley opened below them as they crested the final ridge. A small adobe house with a wooden porch. A weathered barn that needed new shakes on the south side. A chicken coop leaning at a stubborn angle. 3 horses in the corral. A thin stream of smoke rising from the chimney. It was not much, but Tobias had built every plank of it with his own hands and his brother's hands, and it was the only home any of the 3 of them had known since their mother died of cholera in 1871. Eliza stood up in the wagon bed to see. She looked at the house, the barn, the chickens scratching in the yard, the horses lifting their heads. She did not write anything, but she pressed her hand flat against her chest, briefly. A man came out of the barn first. He was tall but leaner than Tobias, quieter in the way he moved. His hair was the same dark chestnut, but he wore it longer, tied back with a strip of leather. His eyes were the soft amber of good whiskey, held up to a lamp. He carried a hand-carved bow over one shoulder and a brace of rabbits in his fist. Ransom Hawthorne, 33 years old. The middle brother, the one who could call a deer out of a thicket by humming. He stopped dead when he saw the wagon. He stopped deader when he saw the girl in the crimson dress. "Toby," he said quietly. "Brother, what did you bring home?" The second man came out of the house. This one was different, compact and dangerous, with the corded forearms of a man who broke horses for sport. His hair was darker than his brother's. His eyes were a stormy gray that did not soften for anyone. He had a tin coffee cup in one hand and a look on his face that could curdle milk. Cassius Hawthorne, 30 years old, the youngest, the hot one. The one who said what the other 2 were thinking, before they had time to think it. He took one look at the wagon, one look at Eliza, one look at his older brother, and he set the coffee cup down on the porch rail very, very carefully. "Tobias," Cass said, "tell me you did not spend our horse money on a woman." Tobias climbed down from the bench. He held out a hand to Eliza. She took it. She climbed down the way a queen steps down from a carriage, in a city where she has never been welcome. "Her name is Eliza Whitmore," Tobias said. "She is from Boston. She is hurt. She is hunted. She is staying." Cass stared. Ransom set the rabbits down on the porch step. Hunted by who? Cass asked. Her stepfather. And what did you pay for her? Tobias did not flinch. $50. The yard went silent. Cass laughed once, not a kind laugh, a bitter one. $50, the price of a mule. You bought a woman like a mule, Tobias. I bought her freedom. She is not a wife. She is not a servant. She decides what she is. And until she decides, she is under our roof. And anyone who lays a hand on her answers to me. Ransom finally spoke, quietly. The way he always spoke. Brother, why is she wearing a red dress in dust country? Because it is the only dress she owns. Ransom looked at Eliza. He smiled, small, gentle, real. Ma'am, he said, mouthing it slow. I am Ransom. Welcome to Crescent Ridge. There is tea on the stove and a fire that needs feeding. Would you like to come inside? Eliza watched his lips. She nodded. She walked past Cass without looking at him, but just before she reached the porch, she stopped. She took the little pine slate from her carpet bag. She wrote one line. She held it up to Cass. I will work. I will not be a burden. 1 month. Then, if you are not satisfied, take me to Boston. Cass read it. He read it again. His jaw worked. He looked at Tobias. Fine, he said. 1 month. But she sleeps in the small room off the kitchen, and we sleep in the barn until she stops being a stranger. And so help me, Toby, if she brings trouble to this ridge. She has already brought it, Tobias said. And it is coming for her, whether we shelter her or not. Cass looked at the girl in the red dress. For 1 second, just one something behind his stormy gray eyes shifted. Then he picked up his coffee cup. Welcome to Crescent Ridge, Miss Whitmore. And he walked into the house. That first night, Eliza slept in the small room off the kitchen. She did not bolt the door. She did not have to. 3 men slept in the barn that night, and not one of them asked anything different. A man keeps his word, ma'am. Always. That was the second thing they had said to her on Crescent Ridge. She wrote it in the back of her mother's old prayer book before she slept. She wanted to remember the exact words. The first week, Eliza learned the rhythm of the ranch. She woke before sunrise. She fed the chickens. She gathered eggs. She kneaded bread the way her mother had taught her, the Boston way, with a wet cloth over the bowl and a long, slow rise. She swept the porch. She mended a tear in Ransom's hunting jacket without being asked. The 3 brothers watched. They did not say much, but they watched. On the 4th morning, she found Ransom in the barn, standing over Liberty. Liberty was Ransom's favorite, a gray mare 20 years old who had carried him out of a flash flood in the Powder River country in 1883. She had found it on a stone bruise the week before. The leg had not improved. She was lame. Ransom had a rifle in his hand. He was not pointing it at her yet, but his hand was on it. Eliza stopped in the doorway. She crossed the barn quickly. She put her hand on Ransom's wrist. She shook her head. She is not going to walk again, ma'am, Ransom said softly. It is the kindest thing. Eliza shook her head harder. She knelt by the mare. She placed both palms against Liberty's swollen leg. She closed her eyes, and she began to hum. It was a sound from low in her chest, a vibration more than a melody, the same frequency that bees make when they swarm. The same frequency the earth had made under the wagon 2 days before the sandstorm. Liberty stilled. Her ears, which had been pinned back in pain, came forward. Her great gray head dropped. She breathed out long and slow. Eliza hummed for perhaps 3 minutes. When she stopped, Liberty lifted her hoof off the ground, just an inch. Then she set it down again. Without flinching, Ransom stared. He lowered the rifle. He whispered, "Holy God." Eliza stood up. She brushed straw off her dress. She wrote on her slate, "She will need cold compress, twice a day. Comfrey. Poultice on the hoof. 3 weeks of rest. She will walk." Ransom read it. He looked at his brother's wife, who was not yet his brother's wife. He looked at the mare. He looked at the rifle in his hand. He set the rifle down. "How did you do that?" he said. She wrote, "My mother. She taught me. She said animals hear what people cannot. We just have to speak their language." Ransom read it 3 times. Then he said something he would later swear he did not mean to say out loud. "This mountain chose you, Miss Whitmore." Eliza tilted her head. She wrote on her slate, "I think it did." By the end of the 2nd week, the chickens followed her. The barn cat slept in her lap when she sat on the porch. Liberty stood square on 4 legs. Even the half-wild chestnut stallion that Cass had been trying to break for 2 years let her run a hand down his nose. He did not bite her. He did not even pin his ears. Cass watched from the corral fence. He did not say anything, but he stopped sleeping with one hand on his pistol. On the night of the 17th day, Tobias found Eliza on the porch. The stars were out. The Big Dipper hung low over the eastern ridge. It was cold enough that her breath smoked. He sat down beside her with a blanket and draped it over her shoulders. She wrote on her slate, "I cannot sleep." "Why?" he mouthed. She paused. The chalk hovered. "I am trying to remember my mother's voice. I cannot. It has been too long." Tobias read the words. He did not write back at first. He just sat there. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. Somewhere a coyote yipped and was answered by another. Then he took the chalk from her hand. What did she look like? Eliza took the chalk back. She had your eyes, patient, like she was always listening for something only she could hear. People said I was her shadow. After she died, they said I was her ghost. Tobias read it. He swallowed. He took the chalk again. You are not a ghost. You are the loudest quiet I have ever met. Eliza read those words. She read them twice. She pressed the slate against her chest the way she had done in the wagon the first day. For a moment, a small private gesture. Tobias did not understand why his throat hurt. Except he did, because he had spent 5 years on Crescent Ridge, convincing himself he did not need a woman. Did not want a woman, did not have room in his stubborn old soul for a woman. And now there was a girl on his porch in a crimson dress riding on a slate by starlight, and he was not sure he could live another day without her. He did not say it. A man keeps his word, always. He had told her 1 month. He would give her 1 month, but he was already in love, and he knew it. The trouble came on the 21st day. Tobias drove the wagon into Dry Hollow for flour and lamp oil. Ransom and Cass stayed at the ranch. Eliza came with him because she wanted to see a town, because she had been at the ranch 3 weeks without seeing another human face except the brothers and Doc Whitaker. The town was busy. A circuit preacher was due that Sunday. Wagons crowded the muddy main street. The general store smelled of leather and salt and pickle brine. Tobias was inside paying for goods when a man stepped out from the porch of the saloon across the street. He was tall, East Coast tall, not Wyoming tall. He wore a black wool coat that had cost more than most ranch hands made in a year. His boots were polished. His hands were soft. He carried a folded paper. He walked straight to Eliza, who was standing by the wagon stroking Dakota's nose. "Miss," he said. She did not turn. She could not hear. He stepped closer. "Miss Whitmore." She turned then, because the air had changed, because Dakota's ears had pinned back, because somewhere deep in her stomach she felt the wrongness of him before she saw his face. The man smiled. He held up the folded paper. It was an advertisement clipped from a newspaper. Her own face stared back at her in coarse newsprint. "Wanted alive. Eliza Whitmore, age 19. Deaf. Mute. Last seen Boston. $500 reward. Contact E. Pierce." Eliza did not move. She did not breathe. The man's smile widened. "Your father misses you, Miss Whitmore. Quite a lot." Tobias came out of the general store with a 50-pound sack of flour over his shoulder. He took 2 long strides and dropped the sack in the dirt. "Step away from her!" The stranger turned. He looked Tobias up and down. He took in the size, the scar at the shoulder, the easy way the big man's hand rested near his belt. He raised both hands in mock surrender. "Just delivering a message, friend, from a worried family in Boston. She is not your friend's family. Step away." "Of course." The stranger backed up 2 paces. He folded the paper. He tucked it into his coat. "My name is Marlowe Hayes. I am staying at the hotel. Should the lady wish to discuss her circumstances, or should anyone wish to discuss the reward?" He tipped his hat. He walked back across the street. Tobias did not move until Hayes had disappeared into the hotel lobby. Then he turned to Eliza. She was the color of bone. She was not crying, but her hands were shaking so badly she could not have written if she tried. "In the wagon," Tobias said. "Now." She climbed in. He drove out of Dry Hollow at a pace that left the townspeople staring. They did not stop until they were 5 miles out. That night, the kitchen of the Hawthorne house was the brightest room in Wyoming. 3 lamps, the fire built high, coffee black enough to stand a spoon in. Tobias laid the advertisement on the table. Cass read it. Ransom read it. The room was very quiet. Eliza stood by the stove. She had her slate. She had a stub of chalk. She had 3 weeks of words in her throat that had nowhere else to go. She began to write. She wrote for half an hour. She wrote until the chalk was a nub and her fingers were white. She passed the slate to Tobias. She passed it to Cass. She passed it to Ransom. And what they read was this. My mother was Constance Whitmore. She was the daughter of Henry Calloway, who made his fortune in shipping out of Boston Harbor. My father died of fever when I was 9. My mother married Edmund Pierce in 1882. He was a lawyer. He was charming. He told her he loved her. He told me he would be like a father. He lied. He hit her for the first time on their honeymoon in Saratoga. He hit her for the last time in October of 1885. He pushed her down the marble staircase of our house on Beacon Hill. He told the police she had been drinking. The bottle of sherry on the floor was a lie. My mother had not touched a drop in 15 years. I was 17. I had been at the top of the stairs. I saw it. I could not hear my mother scream, but I saw her face when he pushed her. And I saw his face after. I went to the police 6 months later. I had found her diary hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible. I had her own words. I had names. I had dates. I made it to the front steps of the station. He caught me there. He dragged me back. He put his hands around my throat in our own foyer, and he squeezed until I stopped fighting. When I woke up, I could not speak. The doctor said the damage was permanent. The doctor was paid. For 1 year, he kept me locked in the attic. He told the staff I was unwell. He told society I had taken a long rest in the country. In August, he found a new way to be rid of me. He answered an advertisement in a Cheyenne paper. He sold me to a man named Travis Boone as a mail-order bride for a frontier rancher. Legal, stamped, notarized. The $500 on that poster is not a reward for finding me. It is a price to silence me.
The only witness to the murder of Constance Whitmore is the deaf girl no one will listen to.
He is not looking for his daughter. He is looking for the last person alive who can hang him. Cass read it last. He set the slate down on the table. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to the room for a long moment. When he turned around, his stormy gray eyes were wet. He did not bother to hide it. "No one," Cass said. His voice was very low. "No one touches her while I am alive." Ransom nodded. He did not speak. He just nodded. And that was Ransom, who never needed words for what mattered. Tobias reached across the table. He took Eliza's hand. Her hand was cold. He covered it with both of his.
"You are under our roof now,"
he said, mouthing it slow so she could read every word. "That makes you Hawthorne. The man who comes for you comes for all three of us, and he had better bring more than $500 worth of trouble, because he is going to find $1,000 worth of it." Eliza looked at the three brothers. She looked at Tobias. Something broke open inside her chest. It was not fear. It was not grief. It was the thing she had not let herself feel in 3 years. Hope. Not the kind that begs, the kind that decides. She picked up the chalk. She wrote one more line on the slate. Her last line of the night. She held it up. "Then I will not run." Tobias read it. He squeezed her hand. "Then we do not run either." The fire popped. The wind moved against the cabin walls. Outside, somewhere far down the valley, a wolf called once and was not answered. The four of them sat at the kitchen table until the lamps burned low. They did not speak much. They did not need to. In the morning, Cass began oiling the rifles. Ransom rode to Sage Creek to send a coded telegram to a man named Ezekiel Tate. Tobias walked the ridgeline at dawn with a Winchester and counted every approach a rider could use to come at the ranch from the north. And Eliza Whitmore, 19 years old, deaf since 14, voiceless for 1 year and 5 months, stood on the porch of a house in the Wyoming Territory and watched the sun rise over the mountains that had decided 3 weeks before to claim her as their own. She did not write anything on her slate. She did not need to. She had already decided. She was home. And she was not running. Not anymore. The first frost came on the morning of October 12th. Eliza walked out to the porch with a tin pail for the chickens. Her breath made a small white cloud in front of her. She stopped on the top step. She looked down. The yard was white. Not snow. Not yet. Just a thin silver crust that covered every blade of grass and every plank of the porch and every fence post as far as she could see. She had never seen frost like this in Boston. Boston had frost, But Boston had brick and gaslight and chimney smoke that ate the silver before sunrise. This frost was different. This frost was clean. She stood on the porch in her boots and her crimson dress, and she watched her breath rise into the cold blue Wyoming sky. And for the first time in a very long time, she let herself feel something other than fear. She felt small, but not the bad small, the good small, the kind of small you feel when you stand at the edge of an ocean. Tobias came out behind her with 2 cups of coffee. He pressed one into her hands. She took it. He stood beside her without speaking. They watched the sun come up over the eastern ridge together, and the silver burned off the grass in long, slow ribbons, and neither of them said a single word for almost 10 minutes. Then Tobias mouthed slowly so she could read his lips. "Winter is coming," Eliza wrote on her slate. "I know." He read it. Then he wrote on the back in his careful, blocky letters, "We will be ready." By the end of the second day of frost, she could understand 30 words in American Sign Language as taught by the Hawthorne brothers, which is to say, she had taught them 30 words, and they were stumbling through every single one like men trying to walk in their wives' shoes. Ransom learned fastest. Ransom learned anything that involved his hands fastest. He could sign water and food and good morning and tired and warm and hungry and sister within 4 days. He sat at the kitchen table after supper every night with his elbows on the wood and his amber eyes fixed on her hands, and he copied each motion like a man memorizing a prayer. Tobias learned slower. Tobias learned slower at everything because Tobias did not move until he was sure. He would watch a motion 10 times before he tried it once. But when he tried it, he had it. And he never forgot. Cassius pretended not to learn at all. For 6 days he sat at the table with his arms crossed, and his stormy gray eyes pointed at the wall, and he said exactly 3 words during the lessons. 2 of them were not polite. Then, on the 7th day, Ransom came into the bunkhouse at midnight and found Cass sitting in front of the small shaving mirror on the wall practicing the sign for thank you. His fingers were stiff and clumsy. His brow was drawn down. He was muttering at his own reflection in the mirror. Ransom watched him for 10 full seconds before Cass noticed him. When Cass noticed him, his face went the color of a barn fire. "You say 1 word, brother. I would not dream of it. 1 word, ransom. My mouth is a tomb." Cass threw a boot at him. Ransom caught it. He left the bunkhouse smiling. He did not tell anyone what he had seen, except he told Eliza. He did not say a single word out loud. He just walked into the kitchen the next morning, where she was kneading bread, and he caught her eye, and he made the sign for thank you. Then he pointed at the bunkhouse. Then he pointed at the mirror on the wall. Then he made the sign again, slower, stiffer, the way Cass had made it. Eliza laughed. Not out loud. She could not laugh out loud anymore. But her shoulders shook and her eyes crinkled and the dough fell out of her hands and she pressed her flour-covered palm against her mouth to keep the laugh from breaking her chest open. Ransom grinned. The brothers had not seen her laugh before. He carried that grin around all day like a man carrying a secret he refused to share. On the 12th night, the storm came in over the Medicine Bow Range. Not a sandstorm, a rainstorm, cold and hard and angry with thunder that rolled across the valley like artillery. Tobias was in the barn when it broke. He had ridden the fence line since noon and had come back muddy to the elbows. He was washing his hands in the trough when the first crack of thunder split the sky open. He stood up straight. He looked toward the house. A lantern was burning in the kitchen window. He walked across the yard in the rain. He stopped at the back door. He did not go in, because through the window he could see her. Eliza was at the kitchen table. She had her back to him. Her hair was down. Her hair was always down now because she had given up on the Boston pins. It fell in honey gold waves to the middle of her back. The lamplight caught it and turned it the color of new straw. She was sewing. She was mending a tear in his old wool coat. The coat he had thrown across her shoulders in the sandstorm. The coat he had not asked her to mend. She was doing it because she had noticed it was torn. Tobias stood in the rain with his hand on the door, and he did not go in. Because if he went in, he was going to do something he had promised himself he would not do for at least 3 more months. He was going to cross that kitchen floor in 3 steps. He was going to put his hand under her chin, and he was going to tell her mouth to mouth, so she could read every word that he had not been able to think straight since the moment she stepped down from the auction block in a dirty red dress. He stood in the rain. He counted to 100. He went and slept in the barn. The rain got into his boots. He did not care. The next morning Eliza handed him the coat. She had patched the elbow and the shoulder. She had reinforced the lining. She had darned the cuff where the wind had been getting in for 3 winters. He put it on. It fit better than it had since he bought it from a quartermaster in Cheyenne 5 years before. He could not look at her. He went outside and split 4 cords of wood before lunch. Cass watched him from the corral. Cass did not say anything, but Cass had eyes. On the 15th day, Ransom asked her to help with the foal. The foal was a colt Liberty had thrown in late August. They called him Smoke. 12 weeks old, black as river stone, sharp ribs, a heart murmur that Doc Whitaker had heard the day after the foal was born and had shaken his head over, and had said kindly but plainly that the colt would likely not see Christmas. Ransom would not let the colt go. Ransom would not let any creature go if there was breath in it. He came to the kitchen door with his hat in his hand. "Miss Eliza, could I trouble you? The foal is bad tonight." She followed him to the barn without writing anything. Smoke was lying in the straw with his head against his mother's flank. His breathing was thin and quick. Liberty stood over him with her ears forward and her gray nose pressed against his neck. Eliza knelt down. She placed both her palms flat against the foal's chest, not on the lungs, lower, over the heart. She closed her eyes. She began to hum. That sound again, the one from low in her chest, the one that had nothing to do with melody and everything to do with frequency. The sound the earth made before a storm. The sound bees made when they swarmed at dusk. Smoke stopped trembling. His breathing slowed, until it matched the rhythm of the hum. She hummed for perhaps 4 minutes. When she stopped, the foal lifted his head. He pushed himself up on his front legs. He stood wobbling and pressed his face against his mother. Liberty whickered low in her throat. Ransom did not speak for a long time. He sat down in the straw beside Eliza. He took off his hat. He held it in both hands. "Where did you learn that, ma'am?" She wrote on her slate, "My mother. She said the body listens to vibration even when the ears cannot. She said the heart has its own ear. She used to do this for me when I had nightmares as a child." Ransom read it. He looked at the foal. "They called your mother a witch." She wrote, "In Salem in 1792, they hanged a great-great-aunt of mine for less than this. My grandmother fled to Boston with 2 children and a Bible. We do not speak of it in the family. We do not speak of any of it." Ransom read those words 3 times. He set his hat down in the straw. "Miss Eliza." She looked up. "This family does not burn witches. This family marries them." She stared at him. Her hand went still on the slate. Ransom realized what he had just said. His ears went the color of his shirt. That is, I did not mean, not me. I meant my brother, Tobias. He is the one. I am sorry. I will be in the loft. He stood up. He hit his head on a beam. He left the barn. Eliza sat in the straw with the foal breathing softly against her knees and the lamplight flickering against the walls, and she laughed. Silently, shoulder shaking, tears at the corners of her eyes. She laughed for a long time. It felt like medicine. 3 days later, Tobias took her down to the small spring in the lower meadow. He said it was to fetch water. It was not to fetch water. He had 3 buckets in the wagon, 2 of which were already full from the kitchen pump. She knew it. He knew she knew it. Neither of them mentioned it. They walked the meadow. The grass had gone gold. The cottonwoods along the creek had turned the color of an old penny. A small herd of mule deer watched them from the far side of the spring, and did not bolt because the does had decided 3 weeks ago that the girl in the red dress was not a danger. Tobias took off his hat. He sat down on a flat sandstone shelf near the water. Eliza sat beside him. The wind moved. He took out his slate. He had carried a slate of his own for 2 weeks now. He had whittled it himself out of cedar. He wrote, "I want to tell you something about me." Before more time goes by, she nodded. He wrote, "I was a lieutenant, 7th Cavalry, Fort Laramie, from 1878 to 1882. She nodded again. He wrote slowly, "In June of '82, we were ordered to a Lakota camp on the Powder River. The order said, 'Hostiles.' I rode in. There were no hostiles. There were old men. There were women. There were children at the cook fires." He paused. Eliza put her hand on his wrist. He wrote, "I refused the order. I told the captain there was no enemy in that camp. He told me to fire. I said no. He drew his sidearm. He pointed it at me. I said no again. He had 3 privates hold me. He had the sergeant flog me at the post that night. 30 lashes. He told me I was finished. I took my discharge papers in October. I took my horse. I came to Crescent Ridge. I built this house with my brothers. I have not slept 3 nights in a row without dreaming of that camp since." He stopped writing. He looked at the spring. A muscle worked in his jaw. Eliza took the slate from him. She wiped it clean with her sleeve. She wrote, "You did the right thing." He read it. She wrote more. "The world punishes good men. It always has. My mother used to say the only difference between a saint and a fool is whether the world remembers them. I think you are a saint. I think the world has forgotten on purpose." Tobias read the words. He read them again. He did not look at her. He looked at the spring. A single tear slid down the side of his weathered face into his beard. He did not wipe it. He did not speak. He just sat there with the slate in his hands and the cottonwoods turning to copper around them, and the deer watching from across the water. Eliza moved her hand from his wrist to his hand. She laced her fingers through his. His hand was rough, calloused. 3 fingers had old breaks badly set. Hers was smaller than his by half, but her grip was iron. They sat that way until the sun went behind the western ridge. Neither of them said another word. Neither of them needed to. That night at supper, Cass set down his fork and looked across the table at Tobias. "Brother, yes, you are going to marry her." Tobias did not look up from his plate. "Yes." Ransom grinned. He grinned so wide that the slice of ham fell off his fork. Cass nodded once. "Good." He picked up his fork again. He ate his potatoes. He did not look at Eliza. but he was smiling around his mouthful in a way that none of them had seen since their mother was alive. Eliza wrote on her slate, "I have not been asked." Cass looked up. He laughed, out loud, a real laugh. "Brother, the lady has not been asked." Tobias turned the color of his shirt. "I was going to, tonight, after supper." "You were going to." "I was. With what?" "A frying pan and a prayer. With my grandmother's ring." The whole table went quiet. Cass set down his fork again. Ransom set down his fork. Tobias reached into his vest pocket. He took out a small folded piece of muslin. He unfolded it. A simple gold band, no stone. Worn down on the inside where someone had worn it for 50 years. Their grandmother, Margaret Hawthorne, who had crossed the Oregon Trail in 1847, with 2 babies and a wagon and a husband who died of fever before they reached Fort Hall. The ring had passed to their mother. The ring had passed to Tobias when their mother died of cholera in 1871. He had kept it in a tobacco tin under his bunk for 16 years. He set it on the table between them. He pushed it across the wood. He looked at Eliza. He mouthed it slowly so she could read every word. "Will you marry me, Eliza Whitmore?" She looked at the ring. She looked at the man. She picked up her slate. She wrote, "Yes." Cass kicked the leg of the table in pure joy. The lamp jumped. Ransom let out a whoop loud enough to startle the chickens roosting outside the kitchen window. Tobias picked up the ring with hands that were shaking. He slid it onto Eliza's finger. It fit like it had been made for her. Maybe it had. She did not cry. She just pressed the slate against her chest the way she always did when something hit her too hard for words, right over her heart. Ezekiel Tate rode into the yard at sundown on the 22nd day of October. He was riding a buckskin gelding the color of dust. His coat was the color of his horse. His skin was the color of old walnut. He was 6 feet 5 inches tall, and he was 1,000 pounds of trouble for anyone he did not love. Tobias loved him. The 2 men had ridden together in the 9th Cavalry from 79 to 81, before Tobias took his commission with the 7th. The 9th was the Buffalo Soldiers. The 9th was black soldiers and black sergeants, and the white officers smart enough to know they were lucky to lead them. Ezekiel had pulled Tobias out of a draw at Big Dry Creek when a rifleman had Tobias in his sights. He had killed the rifleman. He had carried Tobias 5 miles on his back to the field hospital. They were not friends. They were brothers, the kind of brothers blood does not make. He swung down from the buckskin without bothering to tie it. He took off his hat. He nodded at Tobias. "You wired." "I wired." "How bad?" "Bad." Ezekiel looked at the porch. He saw Eliza standing in the doorway. He saw the gold ring on her finger. He took 2 steps onto the porch. He swept his hat to his chest. He bowed. "Ma'am, Ezekiel Tate, at your service." Eliza wrote on her slate, "Tobias has told me everything about you." Ezekiel read it. He grinned. "Lies, ma'am. Every word. I was nowhere near that draw at Big Dry Creek." She wrote, "He says you carried him 5 miles. It was 3. I exaggerate when I tell it. 2 if I'm tired." She smiled. Ezekiel turned back to Tobias. The grin was gone. "Brother, we need to talk." They sat at the kitchen table with the lamps lit and the coffee black. Ezekiel pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and laid it on the wood. It was a telegram. Cheyenne Station, October 19th, 1887. Edmund Pierce of Boston arrived interior hotel. Stop. Hired 5 men from Tilden Burrell Group, Black Hills. Stop. Inquiring after Hawthorne Brothers, Crescent Ridge. Stop. Departure expected within 6 days. Stop. Tobias read it twice. He passed it to Cass. Cass read it. He laid it flat on the table. He looked at Ezekiel. Tilden Burrell. Tilden Burrell. How many men did he take? 5 gun hands, plus Burrell himself, plus Pierce. 7. 7. Ransom rubbed his jaw. 6 days. 5 now, Ezekiel said. I rode hard. They will come the North Pass. It is the only road a wagon can take in October. They will. Cass stood up. He went to the gun cabinet behind the kitchen door. He took down the 3 rifles. He laid them on the table next to the telegram. He opened the drawer below the cabinet. He took out a tin of gun oil and a stack of clean rags. He sat down again. He began to clean the first rifle. Nobody spoke. Eliza watched her 3 men, because they were hers now, her husband-to-be, her brothers in everything but blood, her family, her people. She picked up her slate. She wrote, "What can I do?" Tobias read it. He took her hand. He kissed the back of it. Once, and only once. The first time he had ever touched his mouth to her skin, he mouthed slowly, "You can stay alive. That is what you can do. The rest is ours." She wrote, "I will not be a coward." He read it. He smiled, not happy, sad and proud at the same time. "I would never accuse you of that, Eliza Hawthorne." She caught the name she had not been called yet because the wedding had not yet happened. He had said it anyway. She held the slate against her ribs for a long moment, then set it down. The blow came not from Cheyenne, but from town. 3 days after Ezekiel rode in, the 4 of them went down to Dry Hollow for one last load of winter supplies before the snow closed the pass. Doc Whitaker was waiting outside the general store. He pulled Tobias aside. "Walk with me, son." They walked down the boardwalk past the saloon and past the bank and past the livery. Doc Whitaker spoke low and fast. "Jasper Crow came to my office Tuesday." "What for?" "To tell me very politely that the note on your ranch is due January 1st. Tobias stopped walking. "The note is not due until June. He says it was a balloon clause. He says he is calling the principal. $1,500. Plus interest, $1,640. Tobias did not curse out loud. He did not need to. Doc Whitaker put a hand on his arm. "There is more. More. Tuesday afternoon, I went to the assayer's office. There has been a man from Denver staying at the hotel for 6 weeks. A geologist. Crow hired him. The geologist has been mapping the rock formations on the north end of your property. Why? Because there is silver up there, son. A vein the size of a railway car. Crow has known since August. He is calling the note because he wants you off that land." The boardwalk seemed to tilt under Tobias's boots. Silver. Pierce had bought a hunter. Crow had bought a geologist. 2 enemies, 2 different greeds, 1 ranch in the middle. He looked back down the boardwalk at Eliza, who was standing at the wagon talking to Cass with her hands. He thought with sudden cold clarity that the world had not yet finished hurting her. The world had only just begun. He turned back to Doc Whitaker. "Does Crow know about Pierce?" "He does. He sold Pierce the information about your ranch for $200. He thinks Pierce will do his work for him. He thinks Pierce will take the girl. He thinks you and the boys will get killed in the crossfire. And he thinks he will walk in on a quiet ranch in January with a deed and a vein of silver. He is a clever man. He is a vile man. Tobias nodded slowly. He is going to find out the difference. That same evening, Reverend Henderson's wife, Martha, called a private prayer meeting in the parlor of the parsonage. She did not invite the Reverend. The Reverend was in Cheyenne for a regional conference. She invited 15 women. She brought out the good china. She poured the tea. She told them, with her hands folded neatly in her lap and her chin trembling with what looked like grief, that the strange deaf woman at the Hawthorne Ranch had been seen humming over a sick cow at the Crow place, and the cow had recovered overnight. She told them about the Hopkins boy, who had been burning with fever and had been brought to Eliza in secret by his desperate mother, and had walked out of the Hawthorne kitchen the next morning chewing biscuits. She told them about the chestnut stallion no man could break, that now followed the girl across the corral like a dog. She told them about a woman in Salem 200 years ago who had done very similar things. She did not say the word witch. She did not have to. 3 of the women left in tears. 6 of them stayed for a second cup. By Sunday morning, the rumor had reached every farm in the valley. It reached Tobias on Monday. It reached Eliza indirectly on Tuesday, when she went into Dry Hollow with Cass for thread, and the woman at the dry goods counter would not meet her eye and would not give her change. Just laid the coins on the counter with a folded cloth between her hand and the metal. Cass saw. Cass said nothing. He paid the woman with $1 silver, laid flat on the counter, and he looked at the woman until she looked at him, and he said very quietly, "Ma'am, the next time you treat my brother's wife like a leper, I will buy this store and burn it. Are we clear?" The woman went the color of skim milk. Cass tipped his hat. He walked Eliza out of the store with his hand at her elbow. He drove the wagon home in silence. He did not tell Tobias, but he did clean the rifles again that night, and he slept with one in the corner of the kitchen. The moon rose full on the 29th of October. The wedding was set for the morning of the 30th. Doc Whitaker had ridden in. Ezekiel was there. Cordelia, the housekeeper from Boston, had arrived from Sage Creek the previous evening on Ezekiel's quiet errand. She had brought Eliza's grandmother's wedding veil out of a leather satchel, like she was unwrapping a relic. Eliza had wept at the sight of it. For 10 minutes, without sound. The lace was cream and old and smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. She let Cordelia pin it into her hair the morning of the wedding. She let Cordelia button 47 buttons up the back of a borrowed white dress that had once belonged to Tobias's mother. She let Cordelia kiss her forehead and call her child and tell her that her mother was watching from heaven, and her mother was proud. Then she walked out of the small bedroom and down the hallway and into the front room of the Hawthorne house, where her 3 men were waiting in their cleanest shirts and their best boots, with a fire built so high the lamps were not needed. Doc Whitaker stood with his Bible. Cass stood as best man. Ransom stood with his banjo across his knee. Ezekiel and Cordelia stood as the witnesses. The vows were spoken in 2 languages. Doc Whitaker spoke them aloud. Eliza signed them with her hands. She had taught Tobias the signs 3 weeks before on a cold night by the fire on the small slate that he now carried in his coat pocket every day. When the moment came, he signed back, "I, Tobias Hawthorne, take you, Eliza Whitmore, to be my wife." Her hands moved. "I, Eliza Whitmore, take you, Tobias Hawthorne, to be my husband, in sickness and in health, for richer or poor, "Until death do us part." She signed the last line slowly. "Until death do us part." She did not look afraid when she signed it. She looked like a woman who knew exactly what she was promising. Doc Whitaker closed his Bible. He said the words, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Tobias bent down. He lifted the lace veil. He kissed her once on the mouth, gentle, as a man handling something he could not believe was finally his. Cass cheered. Ransom played a wedding march on the banjo. Cordelia cried into her handkerchief. Ezekiel poured whiskey for the men and tea for the women. The first true snow of the season began falling outside the kitchen window during supper. It was still falling when Tobias carried his wife across the threshold of the small bedroom off the kitchen and closed the door behind them. Outside the snow-covered crescent ridge, in a silver hush that softened every sharp thing in the world. Fade. The next week was the happiest week of Tobias Hawthorne's life. He did not know it at the time. He never does until afterward. Nobody does. But he learned later to mark that week as a kind of holy ground in his memory. The week he taught his wife to skate on the frozen pond behind the barn. The week she taught him to write his name in her grandmother's prayer book. The week Cass came in from the cold one morning, stomped the snow off his boots and called her sister, just the one time without looking at her as he passed her in the kitchen. She had cried. She had cried so hard her shoulders shook. Cass had stood in the doorway with his ears the color of the stovepipe and had muttered, "Aw, hell," and had gone back outside. It was the happiest week. It was the last quiet week, because Pierce was already in Cheyenne with 7 men and the snow had only just begun to fall, and Tilden Burrell was a patient man, and patience is the worst quality an enemy can have. The blow came on the morning of November 6th. Eliza was kneading bread. She felt the floorboards shake under her boots. Not the way they shook when Cass came stomping in. Not the way they shook when Ransom dropped a load of wood by the stove. Different. Many hoofbeats, far away, coming closer. Her hands stilled in the dough. She lifted her head. She listened with her feet. She turned to the door. Tobias was already there with the Winchester. Cass was already there with the Henry. Ransom was already coming down the stairs with the sharps that had belonged to their father. Ezekiel walked out of the bunkhouse with 2 pistols and a face like cold iron. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron. She picked up her slate. She wrote 3 words. She held it up. How many? Tobias looked through the kitchen window. Down the long road from the North Pass. 8 riders, then 12, then 15. And behind them on the far hill, a flicker of orange that should not have been there at 6 in the morning. Torches. He turned to his wife. He answered the question with 3 words of his own. Too many, darlin'. He kissed her once on the forehead. He stepped out onto the porch. His brother stepped out behind him. Ezekiel stepped out behind them. And Eliza Hawthorne, 19 years old, 6 days a bride, untied her apron, picked up the Spencer rifle Tobias had cleaned for her the night before, and walked out onto the porch to stand beside her husband as the riders came down the snow-covered road with the orange light of fire behind them, and the sky over Crescent Ridge began to turn the color of old blood. The riders came down the road at a slow walk. That was the worst of it. A gallop would have been honest. A gallop would have said, "We are coming to kill you." The slow walk said, "We are coming to take what is ours, and we are not in any hurry because you cannot stop us." Eliza counted them through the parlor window. 18 riders. Behind them 6 men on foot with torches. Behind the men on foot 2 wagons. In the lead wagon, hatless in the cold morning, sat Edmund Pierce. She had not seen his face in 14 months. Her stomach turned over once and went still. Pierce had aged. The hair at his temples had gone white. The fine wool coat she remembered from Beacon Hill had been replaced with a heavy buffalo robe. But the mouth was the same. The thin, pale mouth that had told her mother he loved her. That had told the police her mother had been drinking. That had whispered close to her ear the morning he sold her to Travis Boone, that she should be grateful he had not simply put a pillow over her face in the night. She gripped the Spencer rifle tighter. She had not held a rifle until the previous evening. Tobias had stood behind her in the lamplight and put his big hands over hers and shown her where to lay her cheek against the stock, where to set her finger, how to breathe in and let half out, how to squeeze, not pull. He had told her she might never need it. He had told her if she did to aim for the chest because a chest was a bigger target than a head and a frightened person aims small. She had not been frightened then. She was not frightened now. She was something colder than frightened. She was finished. Beside her on the porch stood her husband of 6 days. To his right stood Ransom with the Sharps. To his left stood Cass with the Henry. To Cass's left in the snow at the bottom of the porch steps stood Ezekiel Tate with 2 pistols and the stillness of a man who had been in worse places than this one. The rider stopped 50 yards out. Tilden Burrell raised a gloved hand. The men behind him stopped. The wagons stopped. Pierce did not get down. Pierce was not a man who got down for anyone. Burrell rode forward alone. He was a big man on a big bay horse. He had a scar from the corner of his mouth to his right ear. He carried a Winchester across the pommel of his saddle the way another man might carry a folded coat. He stopped 20 yards from the porch. He tipped his hat. "Mr. Hawthorne, Mr. Burrell, you know me. I know of you." "Then you know how this goes. Tell me how it goes." Burrell smiled. The scar pulled his lip. "The lady comes with us, quiet, whole. We ride back to Cheyenne. Nobody on this porch gets hurt. We have paper from Boston. She is a runaway. Her legal guardian wants her home." Tobias did not move. "She is my wife. Paper from Boston says otherwise. Paper from Wyoming Territory says I married her on October 30th. Doc Whitaker witnessed. Reverend's letter to follow. You can read it after the snow melts. That is not how it works, Mr. Hawthorne. It is how it works on my porch." Burrell sighed, like a man dealing with a slow child. 18 men, Mr. Hawthorne. I see them, and 4 of you. I count 5. The black man does not count for you." Ezekiel did not move from the foot of the steps, but his voice came up clear and cold. "I count for myself, sir, and I will count for 2 of you before you reach the porch." Burrell laughed. It was the kind of laugh men make right before they make the worst decision of their lives. Eliza set the Spencer rifle against the porch rail. She walked down the steps. Tobias hissed her name. She did not turn. She kept walking, past Ezekiel, past the hitching wood, out into the snow of the yard. She stopped 10 yards from Burrell. She faced past him. She faced the wagon where Pierce sat. She lifted her hands. She began to sign. Burrell stared. He turned in his saddle. He looked at Pierce. Pierce stared at her. His face went white, then red, then a color that was not a color at all, because he understood the first sign. He had seen her use it once before, the night she had tried to tell her mother's friends what was happening on Beacon Hill, before the friends had decided not to believe a girl who could not speak. Murderer. He understood the next sign. Liar. He understood the third. Today, the fourth. Today, the whole valley hears. Pierce stood up in the wagon. His voice when it came was the voice she remembered, the smooth Boston voice, the honey voice. My dear girl, my dear ill girl, you are not well. Come down, come back, you are confused. The doctors warned me this would happen. He held out one gloved hand. He smiled. Eliza opened her mouth. She had not used her voice in front of more than 4 people in over a year. She had not used it loud enough to be heard at a distance ever. She did not know if she could. She did it anyway. The word came out broken and raw and far quieter than she wanted it to, but it carried. No! Pierce flinched. He had thought she could not. He had been counting on it. Eliza filled her lungs. She tried again. I am Eliza Whitmore. This man killed my mother, Constance. Whitmore, Boston, October of 1885. Her voice cracked. It did not stop. He pushed her down our stairs. I saw it. He choked me when I tried to tell. He sold me to be rid of me. A rider behind Burrell turned his horse sideways. Then another, then another. Eliza did not see them. She was looking at Pierce. He is not my father. He is not my guardian. He is a murderer. And today, the whole valley hears. Her voice gave out on the last word. She stood in the snow in her crimson dress, and her honey hair and a wedding ring on her left hand, and she did not look like a runaway, and she did not look like a witch, and she did not look like a deaf-mute Boston debutante. She looked like a woman who had just opened a tomb. Pierce drew the pistol from inside his buffalo coat. He swung it toward her. He did not get the shot off. Because the rider second from the left of Burrell's line, a heavy-set man with a black beard drew first, and his pistol was already pointed at Pierce. The shot took Pierce through the right shoulder. He dropped the gun. He fell back into the wagon seat. The heavy-set man swung his horse around to face Burrell. That ain't what we was hired for, Tilden. Burrell's face went the color of old beef. Carter, you drop that pistol. I was hired to fetch a runaway. I wasn't hired to murder a witness in front of 24 men in broad daylight. I'm out. Carter, I'm out, Tilden. He turned his horse and rode back through the line. 2 other riders fell in behind him, then a 4th, then a 5th. 5 men suddenly off the books. Burrell still had 13. Burrell still had the torches. Burrell screamed an order. Eliza could not hear, because she had walked back to the porch steps, and her ears were ringing from her own voice. Tobias caught her before she fell. He pulled her behind him. Cass. Yes. Now. Cass was already moving. He stepped to the porch rail. He shouldered the Henry. He fired once. The torch in the lead man's hand jerked. The man yelped. He dropped the torch into the snow where it hissed and went out. Cass fired again. Another torch. Another yelp. Ransom fired the sharps. The .50 caliber bullet went between 2 riders and into the wagon seat, next to Pierce, who was clutching his shoulder and screaming. Ezekiel fired both pistols at once. 2 of Burrell's men slid out of their saddles. The whole line broke. Some men fought, most ran. The fight, when it came, lasted exactly 7 minutes. Tobias would never remember it as a clear thing. He would remember it, the way men remember battle, which is to say, in fragments. The smell of black powder, the sound of glass breaking in the kitchen window behind him, the hot wetness across his left cheek that turned out to be a graze and not a death. Ransom shouting his name from the chicken coop, Cass laughing once loud when he hit a man at 50 yards. Ezekiel walking, not running, walking through the yard with his pistols up and his face calm. He would remember Eliza. He would remember turning in the middle of the 7th minute and seeing her not behind him, but beside him. She had picked up the Spencer rifle. She had laid her cheek against the stock, the way he had taught her. She had fired once. The bullet had hit a man on horseback who had been riding around to flank them from the south. The man had gone down hard. She would not fire again that day. She would not have to. Because at the 7-minute mark the South Road filled with riders. 12 of them. Marshal Holloway Brooks of Cheyenne and 11 deputies riding hard down the South Trail through the snow. Doc Whitaker had not waited to wire from Dry Hollow. Doc Whitaker had ridden in person to Cheyenne 3 days before when he had walked away from Tobias on the boardwalk and ridden out of town the same hour with 2 saddlebags and a hard look. The marshal saw the smoke. He saw the bodies. He drew his sidearm. He shouted Tilden Burrell's name across the yard. Burrell, who had been about to rush the porch with 3 remaining men, looked left, looked right, threw down his rifle, raised his hands. The fight was over. Pierce was found in the wagon with a bullet in his shoulder and a face the color of dirty paper. Jasper Crow was found a quarter-mile up the north road sitting in his fine buggy, with his hands clutching the reins, having watched the entire failure unfold from a safe distance. He tried to drive away when the marshal's men reached him. His horse was lame. The marshal arrested him in his buggy. He arrested Pierce in the wagon. He arrested Tilden Burrell on his knees in the snow. He arrested 4 other men who had stayed long enough to be caught. The yard at Crescent Ridge, filled with men and horses and steam from horses' nostrils and the smell of black powder. Doc Whitaker came up the road in a buggy of his own. He found Tobias bleeding from the cheek, Ransom bleeding from a graze across the ribs, Cass with a bruise the size of a fist on his jaw, and a grin like a wolf Ezekiel, without a scratch, and Eliza standing on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself and a Spencer rifle at her feet. Doc Whitaker patched the men first. Then he looked at Eliza. He took her hand. "My dear, your voice." She nodded. "You spoke today." She nodded again. He held her hand a long time. Then he reached into his coat and brought out a small leather satchel. "There is one more matter, before the marshal takes the prisoners away." He turned to the road. A small buggy was coming up from the south. It had arrived on the same wave as the marshal, but had hung back during the fighting. Cordelia Whitcomb climbed down from it. So did a stranger. A small woman with iron-gray hair and steel-rimmed spectacles and a black wool traveling cloak. She walked across the snow with the brisk authority of a woman who had crossed harder ground than this in worse boots. She stopped before Eliza on the porch. She removed her gloves. She extended one thin hand. "Miss Whitmore, or shall I say Mrs. Hawthorne? My name is Prudence Ainsworth. I am the senior counsel for the estate of Henry Calloway, your grandfather. I have been searching for you for 14 months. Eliza stared. The little lawyer reached into her satchel and brought out a leather portfolio. She opened it on the porch rail. "Your mother filed a separate will in 1884. She did so in secret. She lodged it not with the family attorney, but with my firm in New York. She named me as executor. She designated her entire personal fortune, $42,416, to pass to you upon her death, irrevocably, and outside of any community property, held with Mr. Edmund Pierce. Eliza stared. Cordelia behind the lawyer was crying. The lawyer continued. I also hold in this satchel your mother's private journal from 1884 and 1885. 23 entries describing Mr. Pierce's behavior in detail. Names, dates, witnesses, a sworn affidavit from Dr. Phineas Hollings, who treated your mother's injuries on 6 separate occasions before her death, and a notarized statement from Cordelia Whitcomb, who served the Whitmore family for 22 years. Marshall Brooks had walked up behind her. He took off his hat. Miss Ainsworth, Marshall Brooks. That is a substantial body of evidence. It is a complete one. It will hang the man. Twice if Wyoming permitted. The marshal looked at Pierce, who was being lifted out of the wagon and tied at the wrists, bleeding and silent for once in his life. The marshal smiled. It was a small, grim smile. Good. The trial took place in Cheyenne in February of 1888. Eliza testified for 2 days. Her voice was still rough. Her voice would always be rough, but it carried. She testified in English when she could, and in sign language when she could not, with Cordelia translating at the prosecutor's table, and a stenographer recording every word. She told the court about Beacon Hill. She told the court about the staircase. She told the court about the hands around her throat. She told the court about Travis Boone. She told the court about a $50 auction in a Wyoming dust yard on the 14th of September. She told the court about a man named Tobias Hawthorne who had paid the money and cut the rope and called her not goods but a person. The jury was out for 40 minutes. They convicted Edmund Pierce of murder in the 1st degree. He was hanged on the 11th of April. Jasper Crow pled out to a lesser charge of conspiracy and attempted theft of property and received 12 years in the territorial prison. Tilden Burrell got 15 years. The reward poster for Eliza Whitmore disappeared from every post office in the Western Territories within a month. She used a portion of her inheritance in April to pay off the note on Crescent Ridge in full. Jasper Crow's silver vein surveyed and confirmed turned out to be smaller than the geologist had claimed. It produced enough to fund the school. She used another portion to begin the school. It opened in the late summer of 1888 in a converted barn on the south end of the ranch. She called it the Whitmore School for the Deaf. The first 3 students were a Cornish miner's daughter from south of Sage Creek and the twin children of a widow, who had walked 2 days through the foothills to find her. By December, there were 9 students. By the following spring, there were 19. Eliza taught American Sign Language and reading and arithmetic and music because music could be felt through the floor by a child with no hearing, and Eliza had spent 5 years learning how. Ransom built her a bigger schoolhouse in 1889. Cass dug a well for it. Tobias paid for every book on the shelves. Hope Constance Hawthorne was born on a hot afternoon in August of 1888. She came into the world screaming. Doc Whitaker laughed as he handed her to her mother. "This one will have plenty to say, Mrs. Hawthorne. Plenty to say." Eliza held her daughter against her chest. The baby's small face turned toward the sound of her mother's heart. She was not deaf. She would never be deaf. Doc Whitaker would confirm it formally a week later when Hope flinched at the sound of a clattering pan. Eliza wept for an hour, not because she had wanted her child to hear,
But because she had been so afraid for so long that her child would have to live the life she had lived, and the fear was finally allowed to leave her body. Tobias sat beside the bed for those whole 60 minutes. He did not say a word. He just held her hand and watched the baby breathe and listened to the wind move in the cottonwoods outside the window. It was the second happiest hour of his life. The happiest was still to come. The Henderson family came to the ranch in late November of 1888. Reverend Henderson drove the wagon. Martha sat beside him with a bundle in her arms. She did not get down right away. She sat in the wagon a long time. Her hands trembled. Her face was the color of fireplace ash. The Reverend finally helped her down. She walked across the yard to the porch, where Eliza was sitting in the late afternoon light with Hope, who was 4 months old, dozing in her lap. Martha Henderson stopped at the bottom of the steps. She did not come up. She held out the bundle. Eliza could see the small face inside the blanket. A baby, 3 months old, eyes wide open, mouth open, watching the world with the alert curiosity of an infant, but not turning toward sound, not flinching at the slam of the barn door across the yard. Martha's mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. She said one word. "Help!" Eliza waited. Martha tried again. The words came in pieces. "I was wrong. About you. I said things. I did things. I taught my whole congregation to fear you. And God has answered. With my daughter, my Mary. She does not hear. She will not hear. Doc Whitaker. He confirmed it last week." Martha sank to her knees in the snow at the foot of the porch steps. Reverend Henderson stood 3 paces behind her with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the ground. "I do not deserve to ask, I know that, but I am asking. Will you teach her? Will you teach me? Will you teach me how to be a mother to a child I do not know how to reach?" The yard was very quiet. Cordelia in the kitchen window watched. Cass, leaning against the barn door across the yard, watched. Ransom, halfway up the ladder to the loft, watched. Tobias, who had come out of the workshop with sawdust on his sleeves, watched. Eliza set Hope gently in the cradle beside her chair. She stood up. She walked down the porch steps. She stopped in front of Martha Henderson in the snow. Martha did not look up. Eliza waited. Martha finally looked up. Her face was streaked. Her eyes were red. Eliza reached down. She took the bundle from Martha's arms. She drew back the blanket and looked at the small face inside. Mary Henderson, 3 months old, looked up at her with wide and quiet eyes. Eliza placed one finger gently against the baby's palm. The baby's small fingers closed around it. Eliza looked at Martha. She spoke, slowly. The voice was still rough. It would always be rough. "Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is choosing not to carry the weight any longer." Martha's face broke. She covered it with her hands and she wept the way a person weeps who has been holding it in for months. Eliza handed the baby back. She offered Martha her hand. Martha took it. Eliza pulled the older woman to her feet. "Come inside, Mrs. Henderson. The kettle is hot. We will begin today." That evening, Mary Henderson was the 14th student enrolled at the Whitmore School for the Deaf. Her mother enrolled with her. The Reverend stayed for supper. He did not preach to anyone. He just ate and thanked Eliza 3 times, and shook every hawthorn hand twice, and drove his family home through the snow, with his arm around his wife and his daughter, sleeping against her chest. Cass watched the wagon disappear down the road. He shook his head slowly. He did not say anything, but on the way back into the house he stopped on the porch beside his sister-in-law. He looked down at her. He cleared his throat.
Eliza. Yes, that was a finer thing than I could have done. She smiled. You would have done it eventually. No, sister, I would not have. He kissed the top of her head. He went inside. He did not see, because he was already through the door, that she pressed her hand to her chest, the way she had been doing for 14 months. Right over her heart. The wind moved softly across the porch that night. The first stars came out one by one. Eliza sat alone for a while longer, watching the snow settle, listening with her boots to the quiet of a valley that had finally accepted her. Then she went inside, banked the fire and sat, and the months that followed became years, and the years became something neither of them had dared imagine when they had stood together on a porch in November with rifles in their hands. The years passed. They passed the way good years pass, which is too fast to notice while they are passing, and slow enough to remember afterward. By 1890, the school had 31 students. By 1893, Ransom married a young widow named Beth Garrison from a Dakota homestead. She had 2 small boys and a way of looking at Ransom that he never quite recovered from. They had 3 more children of their own. By 1895, Cass married Penelope Brooks, the marshal's daughter, in a ceremony at the church in Cheyenne. He was 38 years old and grayer at the temples, and he wept openly at the altar, which surprised exactly nobody who had known him for more than 5 years. Ezekiel built his own house on the south end of the property in 1891. He never married. He said he had married the land, and the land was a less complicated wife. He became the most successful cattleman in the valley. Cordelia Whitcomb stayed on at the ranch as housekeeper governess and family elder. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1902 at the age of 74, with Eliza holding her hand and Hope reading to her from the Book of Ruth. Doc Whitaker died the same year in summer. Hope Hawthorne grew up tall and clever and stubborn. She had her father's amber eyes and her mother's honey hair and her mother's stubborn chin. She learned to sign before she learned to speak. She learned to ride before she learned to read. She learned at the school. She learned at the ranch. She learned at the dinner table where she sat between her 2 uncles and listened to grown men argue about cattle prices and railroad rights and the difference between courage and bullheadedness. She announced at the age of 11 that she was going to be a doctor. Specifically, she was going to be the kind of doctor who helped people hear and helped people speak, because she had spent her whole life watching her mother do that work with her hands and her humming and her schoolhouse, and she wanted to do it with medicine. Tobias said it sounded reasonable. Eliza said it sounded perfect. Cass said girls did not go to medical school. Hope said girls did now. Cass said over his dead body. Hope said, "All right, Uncle, that can be arranged." Cass laughed for 4 solid minutes. He paid for her first year at Boston University in 1906. She finished her medical degree in 1912. The 3rd woman in her class. She came home to Crescent Ridge that summer. She opened a small clinic in Sage Creek the next year. She specialized in audiology. In the years that followed, she would help over 200 children find their voices. She married a quiet man named Samuel Reeves in 1908 during her 2nd year of medical school. He was a teacher at the deaf school. He had been one of her mother's students. They had 3 children of their own. The first was born in 1909, the second in 1911, the third in 1913. The world kept turning. The years kept passing. Pierce hanged. Crow died in prison in 1896 of a fever. Tilden Burrell served his 15 years and disappeared into Mexico afterward and was never heard of again. The reward poster for Eliza Whitmore became a curiosity. Cass framed one and hung it in the parlor over the fireplace next to the wedding portrait from October of 1887, and the picture of Hope in her medical school robes. Tobias never slept 3 nights in a row without dreaming of Eliza's voice on the porch the morning of the fight. He never told her that. He did not need to. She knew. October the 14th, 1917. 30 years to the day after the auction in Dry Hollow. Eliza was 49 years old. Tobias was 66. They stood on the porch of the house Tobias had built in 1882 and rebuilt in 1891 and added a wing to in 1905. The yard had 3 large cottonwoods in it now planted the spring after their wedding. The barn had been replaced twice. The school had grown into 3 buildings and 47 students and 2 assistant teachers. Crescent Ridge had a post office. It had a 1-room train station. It had its own name on the state map, which had only become a state map when Wyoming joined the Union in 1890. The ranch ran 600 head of cattle. The road from Dry Hollow had been graded, and Hope Hawthorne Reeves had brought her 3 children to visit for the autumn week. The oldest was a girl. She was 8. She was named Constance after her great-grandmother, the great-grandmother she had never met, but had heard about her whole life. The middle child was a boy. He was 6. He was named Tobias after his grandfather. The youngest was a girl. She was 4. She was named Mary after Mary Henderson, who had been Eliza's first deaf student outside the family and was now nearly 30 and taught at the school herself. The 3 grandchildren sat in a row on the porch steps at the feet of their grandmother. Eliza was telling them a story. She was telling it the way she told all her stories, and now in a mix of English and American. Sign language, her hands moving in front of her at the speed of memory, her voice rough but warm, the cadence of a woman who had used her voice every day for 30 years and would use it every day until the end. She was telling them about the first frost on Crescent Ridge. She was telling them about a young woman in a red dress who had stood on this porch and felt small in a good way for the first time in her life. The children were rapt. Tobias sat in the rocking chair beside her with a wool blanket over his knees because the cold got into his hip now where the saddle had broken something 40 years before that had not healed quite right. He watched his wife. He watched his grandchildren. He listened to the wind move in the cottonwoods. When the story was over, Hope took the children inside for cider. The porch was quiet. The sun was beginning its slow western drop. Eliza came over to her husband's rocking chair. She did not sit. She stood beside it with her hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her. His eyes were still amber. His hair was white. His hands were spotted and lined and could not quite close around a Winchester anymore, but they could still hold his wife's hand without trembling. He mouthed the question. "You remember that day at the auction, darling?" Eliza nodded. She spoke. Her voice was old now. It was still rough, but it was strong. "I remember. $50. Same price as a mule." He smiled. "And what did you think?" "I thought I was about to die, and then I looked across the yard, and there was a man looking at me, and his eyes did not look at me like the others looked at me. He looked at me like I was still a person." Tobias's eyes filled. He blinked hard. "You always were, Eliza Hawthorne. You always were." She bent down. She kissed his forehead. "And you. You always were a good man, Tobias. The world tried to forget. I made sure I remembered. I made sure the children remembered. I made sure the whole valley remembered." He squeezed her hand. He could not speak. So she spoke for both of them, the way she had been doing for 30 years. "Out here, the mountain decides who survives. It did. And winter always ends. It does. And a man keeps his word. He does. And this is where I belong. This is home. The sun went down behind the western ridge. The cottonwoods caught the last gold light. Somewhere inside the house a child laughed. Then another. Then Hope's voice answering them. Then Cass's voice booming down the hall from the kitchen, complaining that someone had eaten the last of the apple butter again. Crescent Ridge in late afternoon, October 14th, 1917. 30 years. Eliza Whitmore. Hawthorne stood on her porch in a plain gray wool dress with a small gold band on her left hand and her husband's hand in her right, and she did something she had not done in a very long time. She hummed. It was the same low sound from the bottom of her chest, the sound her mother had taught her, the sound that had saved a sandstorm, the sound that had healed a foal, the sound that had become a school, the sound that had become a life. She hummed it for him. He closed his eyes. He listened with his whole heart, which is the only place anyone can ever really listen from. The wind moved in the cottonwoods. The sun finished setting. The first stars came out over Crescent Ridge. There are people in this world who are born with voices. There are people in this world who have to fight to find theirs. And there are people like Eliza Hawthorne who learn that a voice is not a thing in the throat. It is a thing in the hands that mend a coat. It is a thing in the hum that calms a dying foal. It is a thing in the school you build for the children no one else will teach. It is a thing in the man you stand beside on a porch. At 50 yards from a line of armed men when he has chosen you and you have chosen him, and the world is going to have to take both of you or neither. Her voice never came back the way it had been when she was 14. It did not need to. It became something larger. It became a life. It became the laughter of 3 grandchildren on a porch in October. It became 47 deaf children who could read and sign and stand up and tell the world their own names. It became a husband white-haired now, who had not gone 3 nights in 30 years without thanking whatever quiet God watched over Wyoming for the morning he had walked into a livestock auction looking for a horse. It became the wind in the cottonwoods. It became the silver light on the frost. It became home. This was where she belonged. This was where her voice still sings low and steady in the bones of the mountain that chose her 30 years ago, and forever on the morning of a Wyoming autumn, when the only sound she made was the word, no, and the whole valley finally heard.